You're listening to Oh My Health, There Is Hope podcast.
When your heart is aching and your world is shaking, don't give up. No, don't give up.
Hello and welcome to Oh My Health, There Is Hope. I'm your host, Jana, and today I'm here with our guest, Samantha Coffin. Samantha is a health and wellness coach with a crazy history of gut health. After years of struggle, she finally, at the age of 18, was diagnosed with both Lyme disease and Celiac disease. Then at 31 with endometriosis. Samantha has battled gut discomfort, pain, infertility, and lots of things in between. And what she didn't know was for years, she was not alone. There are over 300,000 reported cases of Lyme disease every year in the U.S. And 1 in 100 people worldwide have celiac disease. I did not know that. That's crazy. And in 1 in 10 women have endometriosis. Why aren't we all talking about it? Honestly, I'm so glad that we're going to address this question because I don't know why we're all not talking about it. But thankfully, she has started to get louder about her experiences and decided to no longer settle for a life of feeling crappy. Her journey had been both a messy and beautiful path, and she is grateful for how she has overcome. Samantha strongly believes no one should have to do this alone. That is why she founded the Wellness Rewind, where she helps people who are fed up with gut, sleep, and stress struggles reclaim their wellness and live their best lives. I am so excited to get started because it's a lot. I don't know a lot about celiac disease. And before, I just thought it was a trend. So I'm ignorant and I need to be educated because everyone's like, oh, I can't have gluten. And I think that it was a trend that everybody didn't want gluten, but I didn't realize that those numbers were so high. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Samantha.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here and continue to be loud.
I'm glad that you're loud. You be as loud as you want here, because this is a real place that you can share like your real struggles and journeys and triumphs. So one of the things we ask all of our guests to do is to share their story of hope. So I'm going to give you the floor. And if you don't mind, will you share a little bit of your story of hope with us?
Absolutely. And I'm so excited I can share it. I don't remember a time from my childhood where I wasn't sick from infancy on. And my mother remembers things before I can remember. And we were constantly in and out of the ER, seeing different doctors, and no one could give us an answer. One of my first ER memories is when I was 10 years old and I got a bunch of tests done, ultrasound, scans, everything. And I was told that I had acute appendicitis that was curing itself, so they couldn't take it out. And even at 10, I knew this was crazy and it wasn't realistic. But I continued to be sick, and we at the time were on food stamps and welfare, and we didn't have a lot of resources available to us. And so on top of that, I wasn't well. I experienced that like distended belly where you could like knock on it and it was hard. My weight fluctuated immensely, and I was constantly near a bathroom or knew where the closest one was. And it progressively got worse when I was about 18 years old. It was actually my freshman year of college that was the breaking point for me of like, I should never have to settle for this. I was realizing that other people weren't living with these problems or this fear of being, too far from the bathroom or, night sweats and everything in between. And so I was diagnosed with Lyme disease after passing out, and I ended up, starting to need to advocate for myself when I ended up with kidney stones after my Lyme disease, and all they gave me was antibiotics, and I was still experiencing all of these symptoms, and they were like, oh, well, we've done everything we can do for you. And so that's when I started to be like, I can't live like this anymore. And shortly after, my grandmother was actually diagnosed with celiac disease, which it can be genetic. And so I immediately went gluten-free. I lost 30 pounds in 2 shoe sizes and finally felt like I could exist in my body. And I was a first generation college student. So before discovering that, like I was missing classes, I was really struggling to study. I was really not able to experience my freshman year the way that I had wanted to or dreamt of doing. But then after a few years of being gluten-free, I was still getting sick. And I did not understand what was happening. And I was going to doctors again, and they were telling me, oh, you just have IBS, or oh, you just have this, you're just stressed out. There was a lot of like hysteria type symptoms given to me. And I knew there was something wrong. And then actually just this past October, I had one of the worst pain experiences I'd had in a long time. And shortly after I had that, a friend had come over to drop off a cookbook she had borrowed. And I explained to her what I was going through. And she told me, I really think you have endometriosis. And I had been in and out of docs. I had seen every gyno I could get my hands on. And I also had been experiencing infertility at the time for about 4.5 years. And no one had ever said I could have endo. So I then started calling doctors, and they weren't going to get me in for months and months and couldn't help me get any relief in the meantime. And then I reached out to a friend that had endo, and that doctor got me in like the next week. During the appointment, they found chocolate cysts, and a week later, my surgery was scheduled.
So with your surgery, did you end up having a hysterectomy?
No, so there's a few different procedures that can be done for endometriosis. It's believed that hysterectomies are not a solution at all, because you still have your endo. So endo can grow even beyond the exterior of your uterus. They've seen it, quite high in some women's bodies. So I had what they call an excision surgery. So it's a laparoscopic surgery where they go in and they cut out the different endo pieces.
So I'm assuming that it grows back.
Yes, so it can. So if you have an ablation surgery, which is the other most common surgery, that's like kind of like removing the iceberg of the pieces of endo. And so that is, it's literally burning them off, and they don't recommend that. It's not very respected in the field, if you will, and it can often add more scar tissue and more problems. So thankfully I had the excision surgery, and a lot of women only need one in their life, and some have several. It really depends on your body and what other lifestyle choices you're doing to help, manage your endometriosis.
So, Samantha, can I call you Sam? Because I think you said at the beginning that is how people refer to you. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. So Sam, let's talk. I want to break these all down because I want people to be aware of it, because I too went to a doctor over and over and over and told, I felt crazy. I felt absolutely crazy, but my body was screaming at me. And then when I found out, first of all, it was a relief that I wasn't crazy. But second of all, I just wanted to shout, I told you something was wrong. Why wouldn't you listen? And so I know. So I want to break down each one of these, if you're okay with that, and talk what are some of the symptoms that women, there are a lot of women suffering in silence because they just think it's that monthly thing, or that they're one of those people who are I don't know, have a low pain tolerance, and everybody must be dealing with this, right? And so, and for women who don't have it, that's what they tell you, right? If they don't have it, they're like, oh, that's just your cycle. And it's sometimes take a Tylenol, whatever. So what are some of the symptoms so that they can be more empowered? This isn't normal.
Absolutely. And you actually just said something that I wanted to quickly remember, that when I was diagnosed, I actually had an internal ultrasound when I was at the gynecologist that my friend had referred me to, and they immediately found chocolate cysts, which are a very notable sign of endometriosis. And when they told me that I immediately burst into tears, and they were like, "Oh no, I'm so sorry." And I'm like, no, this is relief of literally 21 years from that first ultrasound at 10 years old to this ultrasound at 31, and 4.5 years of infertility in between. I was able to finally have someone tell me that I wasn't hysterical, I wasn't weak, I wasn't this just complaining. One time when I was about 17, a tech told me I was just complaining of gas, and I was like, oh, this is just gas. But yeah, so for every woman it can be different, or anyone with a uterus it can be different. But what my symptoms were, it started off as a really heavy period from the first time I had my cycle. I also have a lot of GI reactions because, your uterus is so close to your GI tract. I would, experience everything from diarrhea to constipation to bloating and everything in between. When I ovulate, I can often experience debilitating pain that crashes me to the floor. I saw an image in an endometriosis support group recently that showed a person saying, take 800 milligrams of Tylenol. And then it says, you know, my endometriosis, and it's like a massive ship. And the Tylenol is like a little fish, because that's really what it's like. And so many people will just tell you, like you just said, take medication. It's just cramps. You just have a low pain tolerance. But truly, you know, there's a lot of docs out there that will tell you your pain from endometriosis could be as strong as constant contractions like labor.
So the next thing I want to talk about is, so if I'm a woman and I have symptoms going like, maybe this is endometriosis, this is more than normal. What is a test I can ask my doctor to do to help check that out? Like, is it the ultrasound?
Yeah, so there's actually not a test for endo.
I was afraid of.
There's no blood test, there's no ultrasound or anything, or no scan they can do to actually diagnose you. It needs to be done through a laparoscopic surgery because it is all internal. But there are some ways that can lead you to that. So I had hormones tested shortly before, and if you have endo, you're estrogen dominant. And so my blood work came back extremely estrogen dominant. When you have the chocolate cysts on an ultrasound, they can see those, but not everyone presents with chocolate cysts. And it also, like, the pain that you're experiencing does not directly correlate with your stage of endo. So you can have stage 1 endo and be 10 years old and be in the worst pain ever. And then you can have stage 4 endo and don't even know you have it until you're trying to get pregnant.
So that, first of all, makes me sad, because I will tell you that our uteruses are just not on the top of the priority for people to do studies on, to find other ways. So I tested positive for the BRCA gene, and I had family members. I'm actually the only female on my dad's side still alive. They've all passed from ovarian cancer. And when I tested positive, I chose to have a prophylactic hysterectomy and double mastectomy because of that, because they call it the secret killer. And you do not know that you have a problem until you're presenting symptoms. And when you're presenting symptoms and they finally get it, then you're like at a farther stage, and it's usually not curative. So I chose to do that route. So it's a shame that if it weren't for our uteruses, there would be no more population on this planet. And we should take better care of that space.
Absolutely. It's crazy. And to think 1 in 10, I read in one of the books from some doctors that are really diving deep into researching endo, that like it's believed that some of Sigmund Freud's, hysteria patients were truly experiencing endometriosis. And, there's so many cases that go back. Like I spoke with my grandmother, shortly after my diagnosis, and she's like, I had all those symptoms and I had an ectopic pregnancy. And I was just like, Grandma, like, why didn't you tell me? And then I had to step back and be like, because no one told her this could be genetic. No one told her this is something that could be, it has been found in fetuses, like this isn't something that I brought on myself. This is something I was likely born with.
So I really love that we're talking about this, because there isn't enough research for sure. And you'll never see a man's disease with the word hysteria in front of it from anyone. But I think because before, now it's not so much that way, but before, men ruled the medical field and they just didn't understand. And they thought like it was just part of our cycles. We were emotional. It was part of being hysteria or hysterical. And so I'm glad that we no longer live in those ages, although I feel like we could still be doing better.
Oh, absolutely. I still talk to people whenever I come across anyone in any aspect of the medical field. I am now asking them, like, what do they know about it? And I used to do this with celiac and Lyme, because they both are, although much more researched, still dramatically misunderstood. And I hear so many people saying like, oh, it was a day. I learned about it for a day, or it was a line in a chapter in a book. Like it wasn't large enough. And, I've also heard that there's been conferences for endo, of course, pre-COVID, that would show endo up on a screen and doctors couldn't identify it because it presents in so many different colors and in so many different places within our bodies that you can't just be like, oh, that's endo, because it looks different.
I love that. I mean, I love that you're sharing that. I have two daughters that are doctors of natural medicine, but they were in med school prior, and you only get a semester of nutrition. So, and I get that. I get that if you really were cracking down on every single phase of medicine, you would not get out in 4 to 5 years. So I totally get why they have to briefly go through it and hope that you continue your education, learning more about it afterwards. So let's now go to Lyme disease. So I live in California, so we do not have as much issue with Lyme disease unless we're hiking up in the mountains or something, right? But I do know, like, other states, like when I was traveling, doing research and traveling and doing my talking, there were some people that had in different zones had the same symptoms, right? And I'm like, what is going on? But they were Lyme disease patients. And it was only in a very regional area because that's where they were affected mostly. So let's talk a little bit about Lyme disease and what are some of the symptoms? What are some of the things that you can be aware of that you can say, hey, well, maybe it could be this. And this is why I'm exhausted. This is why, I'm feeling like crap and it's getting worse.
Yeah, so my two biggest symptoms that I didn't notice were even something before. So I never saw tick bite. So that was the first thing, and that's very common. And I grew up in Massachusetts, which is a hub. So as you mentioned, right, there are definitely hubs, Massachusetts, all of New England, really, and also down into some of the southern states. I'm in North Carolina right now, and it's prominent here as well. So I noticed a lot of fatigue and what I call brain fog. And so I would have a really hard time concentrating, or I would have a thought and kind of lose it. I also had this time where I would have verbal dyslexia. Like I would say sentences, and I still sometimes do it, where I'll say sentences with letters mixed up. And it all happened after this. And I also experienced extreme weakness in my joints. So I would drop dishes and not understand why. I was a very active person when this was happening. I was running, I was on the lacrosse team, and I felt like I couldn't participate. I couldn't stretch my body like I used to anymore. And you would sleep, but not feel like you actually were rested ever. So those are my experiences, and a lot of people have many, many others. But I definitely think fatigue is one of the largest that most people experience.
I agree. I think fatigue and the brain fog, like they think they're getting dementia, it gets so bad. So when you, okay, is there a test you can ask your doctor for if you feel like you could have Lyme's disease?
Yeah, so there are, and there, Lyme disease actually generally comes with a lot of co-conditions. And so there's a lot of other viruses that you can get, and you have a much weaker immune system when you contract Lyme disease. So although you can get tested for Lyme disease and go on a curable antibiotic, it's debatable if it's cured, right? But you can go on an antibiotic regimen, but that doesn't mean that you weren't exposed to other co-conditions when you contracted Lyme or after with a weakened immune system. But you can absolutely get a blood test done, and it depends too on how far away your tick bite was, how much they can see in your blood work.
I know from what I know about Lyme's disease that there are phases of it, right? You could be in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and the longer you ignore the symptoms, I don't think that medication is curative for it. I think that it can also create a thriving space for you once you get it under control. But I know people who've been struggling with it for years because it wasn't diagnosed until many years out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you for correcting that. I agree. It's not curable, right? And of course, hearing my voice, you can't see the finger quotes, but no, I think that other doctors do believe that it can be cured with this path. But I believe there's a certain time frame, and I can't remember it exactly, but if your tick bite is found within so many weeks, I want to say it's 2 weeks, then the antibiotic is more likely to help you. But if it's past that, it's not.
So I've been saving my most curious is celiac disease. And I know that has to do a lot with gluten. And I hear everyone saying, oh, I'm gluten-free. And I don't know if it's a trend thing. By the way, I'm not gluten-free, but I limit my gluten because I know of the inflammation response in gluten. And I know inflammation response is triggering everything that could go wrong in your body. And so I limit mine. I'm definitely not gluten-free, and I definitely do not have celiac. But I hear everyone saying they're gluten-free. And it can be scary if you literally take all gluten out of your diet and you're not having, if you don't have celiac disease, because you could eat a piece of licorice or something you're not even aware that gluten's in, and your body will have a horrible reaction because it's bad.
It's really bad. Yes. Yeah. My first experience when I went gluten free and then ate something, it was horrific. My mother had made an entire gluten free Thanksgiving the year I was diagnosed, and it was horrific. She did such a great job, and the juice that she served had gluten in it. It was like the saddest thing ever, and I just felt awful. But the symptoms that I experience with celiac is I get really, really hot. I get a fever, and it presents itself. You can see I'm physically, like, I'll get flush in the face. I get a very bloated stomach almost instantly, and then I will have GI symptoms that last for 1 to 2 weeks. And so it's not small. And also when I'm exposed to gluten, it's then harder to digest some other harder foods like dairies. It's nearly impossible because the villi are killed in your intestines when someone with celiac eats gluten.
Yeah, I 100% agree. My sister is a cardiac nurse, and she gets migraine headaches, and she stopped eating gluten and then ate gluten, got very sick. So now, because she doesn't have celiac disease, she introduces gluten on a rare basis, right? She'll eat a piece of licorice, she'll have a little bit of beer or whatever to keep her body being able to process that gluten. So for those of you who are doing a trendy sort of, I'm gluten-free because that's the thing to be,
yeah,
that's
no.
okay. But know that if you can't maintain that, you can make yourself very sick.
Well, and there are people that are sensitive and, quote unquote, what we would identify as allergic to gluten without having celiac, right? So there is that other population of people that should take it just as seriously as celiacs take it. But there are also a lot of people, I have a friend that's a bartender, and her restaurant serves, different gluten-free drinks and gluten-free pizza, but she'll have multiple people sit down and order a gluten-free pizza and a Coors Light. And, she gets frustrated because she knows that, like, that makes it more and more difficult for people to be safe with my dishes at restaurants.
Right. I agree with that 100%. So what are some of the symptoms? You went over bloaty tummies. What are some of the symptoms that people be like, every time so here's how I knew when something's bad for me. I keep a journal. And everyone knows me, knows I have no stomach. So I eat what I can, and it stays down, it doesn't stay down. And what do I absorb? Well, one of the things I do is I keep a journal, and I literally write after I've eaten something, how I feel, like within 30, 40 minutes of it. And if I feel tired, sluggish, I'm not going to probably eat it again. But if I feel like, wow, that was just exactly what I needed, I feel like I've got energy from it. And I tried then to go from that list of things. So keeping a journal was really helpful for me.
That's actually what I recommend my clients do. And I tell them to eat all the foods and feel all the feels, and then see what it presents to you, right? Because it's not about judgment at all. It's about really being able to listen to what your body is trying to communicate to you. And we are so far from being able to hear our bodies if we're eating a very stereotypical American diet and living a very stereotypical American lifestyle. It's very hard to listen to these very small hints and clues that your body is sending to you until it's screaming it at you. And then you're like too far gone, right? It's going to take you like 3, 4, 5 times as long to work your way back. But if you're just listening to these little cues, like you're saying, like, wow, this meal made me feel energetic, and like, ooh, this meal, I'm going to bed, like you can really learn a lot from that without needing to seek, the help of a doctor. Like, yes, of course, there's places and times for doctors, but if you are willing to put in the time and listen to your feelings and your body's reaction to food, you can dramatically increase your lifestyle.
So Sam, the other question I have for you, is there a test for that? So if somebody feels like maybe it's gluten that's making me feel so miserable, and I think tummy bloat is a huge indicator that there might be something wrong with something you're eating. But if there is there a test that they can ask their doctor for?
Absolutely. There's 2 different tests that you can get for celiac disease. And it's always important to remember, if you have stopped eating gluten, you're more likely to have a false negative. I actually went through this. So my grandmother went through a blood test, and then you get a scope done for it. And, the blood test will show a lot, but then the scope confirms based on like the condition of your villi and everything in your intestines. But if you have stopped eating gluten, and depending on how long it's been and how long your body has been in that like extreme fight or flight stage of like, I really need you to stop eating gluten, your body will slowly repair itself and feel better and better and better. And so it'll be harder to get that positive test that you have celiac. But there are those two options. And then also, like, if you're still feeling symptoms and you're negative for both of those, there's no reason why not, with the support of your doctor, do an elimination diet and see, like, is this something that I'm sensitive to, or is this something that I'm actually allergic to and should stop eating?
I love that. I think that's a great idea, is to like restrict yourself for a short period of time, keep that journal, see how you feel. And hey, maybe that is it. And I need to limit the gluten I take or remove it. If you remove it, just be sure you remove it. Be careful.
Exactly. Because it's sneaky. It's sneaky.
Yes.
Like you said, I remember the first time I reached for, licorice after I was diagnosed, and I was like, what? And, also dressings and juices, and, it's in marinades, it's soy sauce. It sneaks into the most rude places. It's so rude.
So tell us how you, we have a few minutes, and I want you to tell us how you reach out and help women now.
Absolutely. So I am most vibrant and alive on Instagram, and I love to provide everything from recipes to self-care tips and everything in between to my community. And then I also offer one-on-one coaching. And so I have a 12-session program, because everyone is at different stages in their life and moves at different pace, so that people can go from every week to twice a week, or, once a month, whatever serves them. But I also just prioritize mainly showing up for people loudly and supportively on social media, so that they know that there's someone they can come to realize that their experiences are real. For me, it took one person saying, like, what you're going through is something that I understand, and it has changed my life.
Well, I'm so glad that you came on here and shared your experience, because I do think it needs a voice. And I think if we all stood up for ourselves and for our family and our friends and gave it a voice, then change is going to happen. And it has been happening. It just, I don't think fast enough. So we definitely want to promote change.
Yeah. And I always remind people, if you don't show up for yourself, who will?
100%.
Like you have to. You have to. And I can sit here and live in this body with these experiences and just suffer through it. Or I can say, no, what I'm experiencing is not average. It's not normal. It's not acceptable. I don't have to live like this. And, although all three of these conditions aren't going anywhere in my body, I'm able to manage them. And instead of having a life full of symptoms, I can have a life full of living.
I think that is a beautiful way for us to finish this, because you do want to have a beautiful life of living. I do want to say that when you have to stand up for yourself, I know I never did. I always said, okay, I'll try that. Okay, that makes sense. But my body was screaming, no, that's not, there's something wrong. And I didn't stand up for myself. And literally I almost died several times because of it, or I made the situation worse because I just didn't stand up for myself. Having said that, for those of you with children, I remember being physically removed from an emergency room, taken to the parking lot, told to get in my car and leave because my daughter was sick and not being helped. And I drove to another hospital, thank God, and her appendix had ruptured. And they kept telling me she had gas. She has gas. We're not going to see her. I threw such a fit. Security walked me up. Why don't we all stand up for ourselves like we would stand up for our children or a little innocent animal, right? Like, we're worth it. So start standing up for yourself and being heard. And if your body is screaming that there's something wrong, make sure you're being heard. And if that doctor isn't hearing you, go to another. So thank you so much for sharing your beautiful message and your incredible voice on all of these things. I love it. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you so much for sharing all that you do.
We're going to put all of Sam's links in the show notes, so you guys are going to be able to reach out and join her community, get to know her. And if you have any questions on those things, I definitely would reach out to her.
Thanks for listening to the Oh My Health There Is Hope podcast. Make sure to visit Jana's website, bestholisticlife.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, or listen there, so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you simply tell a friend about the show, that'll help too. Let's change the world together, one health expert at a time. Looking forward to seeing you next time.